Hey everybody, ronarray here, and I've been a big Blight fan from Blight League itself. I also did an in-depth guide about it some time ago, but on 3.25 we received so many changes to scarabs and farming strategies, so I think it's time to fresh it up, adding more information about Blight mechanics. This guide is going in-depth as usual, and I'm going to showcase everything from oils you will need to use on both Blighted Maps and your rings to the possible Atlas setups for Blight runs. Check out the timestamps if you're interested in some particular topic, and let's go! So, the first and probably the most important thing is what Ring Anointments you will need to have to make your Blight fights easier. Here we have a few options. The most important one in my opinion is Chill. It requires silver and opalescent oil together, which can be a little expensive, but it's really worth it. The buff will constantly freeze enemies in a proper tower setup, and will stop them from moving in most cases. Get this one ASAP to trivialize most of the Blight encounters. For the second ring we will have a variety of options. The most common one is Meteors, with indigo and violet oil. It will create burning ground while your meteors are hitting, and it's a great buff that will help you to counter proximity shells, since burning ground can damage enemies in those shells just fine. It can also add a lot of DPS as well and will speed up your big Blight fights. But if you have enough DPS and don't want to pay a lot at the moment, you can roll on power bonus as an option. Just Sepe plus other oil and your empowering towers will boost your freeze and stun heavier. Generally, I run Meteors and Chill myself and can recommend this combo to everybody, because it helps to make your encounters much easier. So after we kinda decided what we need on our rings, the next question is what to build. And that question is pretty easy too. Generally we just need only 3 or 4 types of tower. So we're building Chilling Tower because it's going to slow down enemies and will synergize with our buff on our ring. We're also building Stunning Tower, just a feast to stun enemies and make sure they will not move together with Chilling them. After that we just need to build Empower Tower. All of those towers should be level 3, so you don't need to pick the last buff that will give you an option to choose from the two. Just level up to level 3 and keep it like that. If you already got all of them, you can go and build Meteor Tower. That way you will just need to level up Fire Tower to level 3 and then choose the left buff, the Meteors. That's pretty much it, and you don't really need to build anything else in most cases. You can add a few different tower types for additional nodes, and I'm going to talk about that a little later. However, here it's pretty much what will be able to carry almost all your Blight encounters. There are two options now how can we engage with Blight mechanics. Blight encounters in normal Atlas maps and farming Blighted maps themselves. To get Blighted maps you will need to buy them or drop them from Blight mechanics encounters in regular Atlas maps. So let's focus on that first. After all Scarab changes, it feels like Blight in Atlas maps is more of a supportive mechanic that is mostly used to acquire Blight maps and some oils, so I want to showcase a few possible strategies for it. But first let's look at the Atlas that you will need to use for it. So that's the current Atlas that I would expect to use with Blight mechanics. It currently has most of the peaks for Blight, and on top of that we also have some additional explicit modifiers bonuses, because explicit modifiers can raise amount of pack size and quantity in the maps, and it's going to affect our Blight chests too. I'm also taking Shaping the Skies because I think Shaping the Skies is pretty great for special map crafting options, and it's definitely worth 3 points. Another question is, do we need to take Sturdy Construction? Generally, I think Sturdy Construction is a very good node. Even if you have enough DPS, getting Incore Pump for 100% increased durability is a pretty good setup, and I think it can help, especially if Blight encounter will spawn too bad or too close to the pump. The most important part here is Blight Chest and Fungal Horizon. That way Blight Chests are going to have more chances to draw Blighted maps, and I think it's very nice. We'll also get Blight Reach, but we will need to keep in mind that Blight Reach have a very low duration, so just capitalizing on that could be a little too hard. So as you can see, I spent only 87 points in that setup, because you can add any mechanics that you like on top of that. If you like, for example, Delirium, you have options to take Delirium here and here, together with here, and pretty much here. So just spawn points for Delirium, for example. If you like Beyond, for example, you can just go here and take that. You can also take Harbingers or Harvest, because you will have enough points to get all of that in. So generally, Blight could be played with any other mechanics that you like. So just try to use it as some kind of builder and add stuff that you prefer yourself. So personally, I would recommend such combination with Harvest, because it's going to give you free Harvest every map together with Blight and a lot of explicit modifiers. I think such approach can net a pretty nice amount of currency and should be played very good when you have a Harvest and supportive mechanics such as Blight. So feel free to use it, but if you like other mechanic, you could easily go for the previous three and add that mechanic on top of Blight. So about Cassia's Sprite, that node is pretty much bringing the attention pretty often, because sometimes people are picking it and sometimes they don't. So generally, I don't really recommend Cassia's Sprite in most cases, even if your build is like average, because Cassia's Sprite is not really buffing damage from your burning grounds, that is going to be there from your meteors. And your stunning and freezing towers are not doing a lot of damage anyway. That way your build will probably do more damage than those towers in almost all cases. I think the only way when Cassia's Sprite could be justified, if your build can do damage like at all, for example it's 2 melee and you can't come close to enemies. That way you can just take Cassia's Sprite and hope that towers are going to kill enemies, like themselves. But most of the time I don't recommend to touch it. On the other hand, Sturdy Construction together with Blight Monsters take increased damage is a great way to speed up your Blight encounters. And I think it's recommended not just because your build is weak, it's mostly because it will speed up the whole encounter. Pretty much another part for speeding up encounters, immune response. Immune response will spawn enemies much faster, and it can make your encounters significantly faster on maps. Try to take those if your build can handle it. If you can't, you can just drop immune response and keep Templar and Divinity going from up there. So completely take off Blight pack size, immune response, and keep Blight Tower cost. And Blight pack size here, only one node with Blight encounter chances. That's pretty much the best option that can help you if your build can't handle Cassia's in maps. So for basic setup, for a basic strategy, you just need two Scarabs, Blight Scarab and Cartography Scarab of Escalation. Cartography Scarab of Escalation here is to raise the chances to get some maps. It's very good for Blight because you're going to get Blight maps, and Blighted Maps is what you're trying to farm. And you will need Blight Scarab just to get Blight encounter on the map. The rest, like 3 Scarabs here, could be used for the second mechanic that you are going to use. So for example, if you are going to use a Harvest, you will be able to use a Harvest Scarabs in there. Like Harbingers, it's Harbinger, and Delirium for Delirium, and stuff like that. So generally we have a lot of open space. That strat is pretty much very close to be free and completely non-expensive. So you should consider it basic and run it if you want to fight a little Blight in the maps without thinking a lot about the Scarabs. So for second strategy, we should focus on Blight Scarab of the Blight Heart. Blight Scarab of the Blight Heart will give us one big Blighted chest. And one big Blighted chest can be pretty nice if it will roll with great rewards. But keep in mind that Scarab is just like very random. So if Blight chest will roll bad rewards, well, you will receive nothing. And if it will roll good rewards, you will get a pretty cool loot from it. So if you feel risky, you can run that strategy just Escalation, Blight Scarab, and Blight Scarab of Blight Heart, and pretty much just hope that your Blight chest will continue something good. So you can also add Blight Scarab of Invigoration, because that way your empowering towers are going to give you additional difficulty and reward. However, that one costs about 8 chaos itself and could add additional cost to the strategy. Since it not provides a lot of stuff, I don't really recommend to run it. However, if you feel like trying to roll your luck even more, you can try to run it like that. But basic strategy would just be Blight Heart, Blight Scarab, and Scarab of Escalation. And the last strategy is Big Explosion. For Big Explosion, you will need to use Titanic Scarabs of Treasure. Titanic Scarabs of Treasure are going to give additional rewards to all Blight bosses in the location. And that's probably the most risky, but, well, kind of rewarding strategy. Be very careful with it because you will need a very good build, and if the prices are not in your favor, you could lose money on that. However, I tested it and the loot explosion been, well, like really big. So you could use Blight Scarab of Blight Heart to add more monsters to the waves, Blight Scarab of Blooming to add some bosses, and 3 Titanic Scarabs of Treasure to pretty much boost additional rewards to all of those bosses. Yeah, generally, it's a pretty risky strategy, and I can't really recommend it right now, but I think it could be better in theory and in the future, especially after the prices for scarabs will be a little more stabilized. So feel free to check it out if you like big loot explosions. So what maps we would need to run with that strategy? I generally recommend to run Underground Sea or Toxic Sewers, because both of those maps are going to provide you with one line of Blight and is going to give you a proper layout so it will be easier to defend. However, on top of that, we have another option, such as Dunes. Dunes is crazy open map, but in 3.25 they added a new cool bonus called Templar Ingenuity. It will give you a chance to pretty much salvage your Blight towers for rewards. So if you're going to run such open map as Dunes, you're going to receive a lot of space to pretty much build the towers. So if you want to focus on salvaging, you can run open maps such as Dunes, for example, and it should work just fine. Templar Ingenuity going to provide you with the proper rewards from it. If you don't really focus on salvaging, you can just run Underground Sea and Toxic Sewers as we did before. Another important thing to mention is that your Atlas buffs are not affected Blighted Maps. So Blighted Maps are not affected by any picks in your Atlas, and you can use any Atlas that you like because not a single buff is going to be applied, because your Blighted Maps are separate instance. So keep it in mind because that's the question that people usually ask about it. So how to prepare your Blight Maps? First off, you need to pretty much take your Blight Map and chisel it. It could feel a little expensive, but still. After that, you can pretty much roll it, and your monster pack size and quantity is going to be applied to your chest, so at 25% value, as you can read on the map. So that way you can roll it for better quantity, for example 94. There's also a few modifiers that you need to avoid. So currently you need to avoid monsters cannot be stunned and monster speed cannot be modified to be below base value, because it's going to ruin the whole approach to the map itself and monsters will just ignore your towers. It's a bad situation, so try to avoid those two modifiers. After that, map can be prepared and you need to add your oils and anoint it. So generally, when we are anointing our Blight maps, we will have a few strategies. Personally, I prefer to run 3 reds, because 3 reds are going to give you a lot of Blight chests are lucky, together with some pack size. I think it's a very good opportunity. So also another option, if you want to run Blight map as fast as possible, to run 3 teals, because teals are going to make your Blight monsters spawn faster. However, make sure that you will not crash, because it will create so many monsters at the same time, and you will need to do a strong build for it. Also, there's an option to combine those, for example, to run 1 teal and 2 reds, which could be pretty decent as well. Another cool option could be running silver oil together with 2 crimsons. It could be dangerous because you would lose money on that if the roll will be not that good. However, it still can provide a pretty decent result. You can also replace last oil with something basic like Ember, because it's going to reduce cost of your buildings, and that way it will be much easier to defend. So if you feel like your build is not strong enough, feel free to replace some reds with at least embers, or for example, sepia if you're not sure that you can do enough damage and you want to do more damage with your towers. Using clear is also an option, but generally it's not really recommended because 12% of reduced monster movement speed is just not enough to go for it. So if your build good enough, just use 3 reds. If you want faster option, add 1 teal. And if you feel like you're very feeling lucky at the moment, feel free to add 1 silver oil. That's the most generous and basic set of buffs that you can use. I'm sure there's a few other options, so if you know about any, feel free to let me know in the comments. So what about Blight Ravaged Maps? Blight Ravaged Maps is pretty much harder version of normal Blighted Maps, but it has a unique option. It can be anointed up to 9 times, which is very cool bonus. So overall, to run Blight Ravaged, you will need to much stronger build, because it will be pretty hard in some cases. But you can expect better loot too. Generally, it's a little tricky because loot from Blight Ravaged could be random, and considering the map itself has a pretty normal cost, it could lead to a situation when you could lose money with it. So be very careful with Blight Ravaged in that regard. However, there's a few options how you need to anoint it and how exactly it should work. So generally, first anointment should be 3 silver. Almost always, because it can provide a lot of quantity. It will be very expensive, but 3 silver is a very good option. After that, you can pretty much add blacks, because blacks are going to add you blight chests containing additional rewards, which is absolutely awesome. And on top of that, you could add opalescent or red. So, for example, 1 opalescent or 2 opalescent could be a very good option. And if you want to make it faster and you're sure that your build is strong, you can add teals. So normal combination would be 3 silvers, 2 blacks, 1 teal and 3 opalescent, for example. Or 3 silvers, 2 blacks, 1 opalescent, 2 teals and 1 red, for example, if you have it. That way you're definitely picking one of those 5 types of oils. So you always will have silver in that, but everything else could be changed. There's also an option to run 1 gold. So 1 gold, 3 silver, 2 opalescent, for example, 2 blacks and a teal. But I think running gold could be too expensive and too risky, so I would not recommend it. However, sometimes people still run it. So mostly all of those options are viable. Try to use oils that you currently have for Blight Ravaged, and I'm sure you're going to turn in at least some profit. Another good question: should you corrupt your Blight maps? Generally, I think corruption is not a bad idea. It can give you some additional bonuses, which is definitely not bad. But it can break your map too, so if you're feeling risky, feel free to corrupt because you will be able to receive more loot that way. If you don't really feel that risky and you want to play it safe, avoid corruption altogether because it can lead to not good situations when your map will be bricked just by bad modifiers. So another great option to add additional quantity to your maps, especially to Blight Ravaged, but to normal Blights as well. You can always add sacrifices for just a little but a quantity bonus to your map when you're starting it. So just add the whole mask here and the map like by the center. It doesn't matter where it will go from. You can easily exchange it like that. But generally, it's a great way to buff quantities, so try to do that, especially if you're already paying a lot for the map. So what I can pretty much recommend to do right now? As I already mentioned, I think right now Blight is mostly supportive mechanic, so I recommend it to combine it with something that can give you a proper profit by itself and just run it together. Blight itself can give you some rewards, can give you some oils and even some golds. You can also just focus on Blight Ravaged maps if it's your thing, run it with triple silver or with 1 golden and 2 silvers and stuff like that. I honestly think any approaches like that pretty much going to net you a decent amount of rewards. However, for me, after all the tests, I would say in normal Atlas maps, Blight itself is just not stable enough in terms of rewards. It's just not providing enough rewards for a decent amount of time. However, if it's used like a supportive mechanic, it shines very good because it's going to drop you some cool stuff here and there for very low investment. So for me right now, Blight is the best supportive mechanic that we currently have in the game. And that's been my updated Blight guide, and I hope it will be helpful for you to go and farm some Cassia. It's Branch in Exile. See you next time.